In the Pokemon community, fans are always looking forward to the next new thing, and even though Generation 8 still has a ton to offer over the next few years, one can't help but think about what could come next. Since new Pokemon, and starter Pokemon specifically, are always so much fun to talk about, I thought today I would discuss what I believe are the most likely places to become Pokemon regions in the future, and also take a look at what starter Pokemon each of these regions could possibly have. We're going to be doing some legitimate predicting, some analyzing, and some speculation all at the same time, and trust me, it's going to be a ton of fun. This list is also not in any particular order either, and all of the fan art I am using in this video will be credited in the description. The artists are clearly amazing, so I highly recommend you check them out and give them a follow. Without any further ado though, let's get right into it. First off, I'm going to start with what I believe is one of, if not the most likely place to become a Pokemon region in the future, Australia. Australia just has everything going for it in terms of being a Pokemon region. It's got a wide variety of environments, an extremely wide variety of unique animals, some of which basically already are Pokemon, a lot of interesting culture and history that it could play off of, and it's even isolated enough that Game Freak wouldn't have to bother with the idea of traveling to a second region. For real though, Australia's got everything it needs to be an amazing region, and based on the kinds of settings we've seen in other regions recently, I believe an Australia region would complement those areas well. For instance, it could be a nice change of pace coming off of Galar, but wouldn't be ridiculously tropical either like Alola, and would have a whole vibe about it that it could certainly call its own. Looking at possible starters though, this is what I believe an Australian region could have. In order to make the best predictions possible, we have to start with the fire starter, since we know that the fire starters are based on members of the Chinese zodiac. This makes it much easier to narrow down a possible candidate, and also allows us to more easily make picks for the other starters that would properly balance out the fire type. Anyway, for the fire type, I think we could see a starter based on a snake in an Australian region. There are certainly plenty of snakes in Australia, and a fire snake just has a vibe that would match an Australian region really well, in my opinion. And of course, it's also a member of the zodiac that hasn't been used yet. For the grass starter, I went with the obvious choice and settled on a koala, even though we got Komala in Gen 7. There's no doubt whatsoever though that we would get another koala Pokemon if an Australian region happened, but since it would need to be different to Komala comparatively at the same time, I think making one a grass type would be a perfect fit. Furthermore, koalas are also basically the mascots of Australia, and starter Pokemon are mascots of their region, so it just makes sense. Finally, the water starter is a more unique choice, but in Australia there's an animal known as the water rat that is native to Australia that I think could work really well. The key thing with water starters is that whatever they're based on has to be able to survive on both land and water. Every water starter to this point fits this description, and it just makes sense as any starter needs to be able to be adaptable and be with its trainer wherever they go. The water rat does this, and being native to Australia also helps its case as well. Finally, as a rodent, it can individualize itself more compared to the mammal and reptile we've already selected, so overall I think it's a good choice. Also, for those who might be wondering, I did naturally consider the platypus as the water starter, but considering that Temtem, the Pokemon clone that recently released, is using a platypus in their game that was actually originally designed as a fake water starter Pokemon by an independent artist, I think that Game Freak would naturally want to do their own thing here and go in a different direction. Moving on, I think another region that is very possible is another region set in Japan. The first 4 generations were all set in Japan-based regions, but since Gen 5 we've been seeing regions based on other areas of the world, and now there are as many non-Japanese regions as there are Japanese ones. So, given that Pokemon is a Japanese franchise anyway, I think it's always going to be a possibility that we return to a Japanese region someday. As far as where another Japanese region region could be, I think the Chugoku region of Japan would be a good choice, since it sits right in between Kansai and Kyushu, the inspirations for Johto and Hoenn, and I think that having a region that bridges the gap between two others and makes the Pokemon world more interconnected would be really cool, and could be a nice contrast after having several regions in a row that are more isolated being based on other areas of the world. Getting into the starters, we are once again starting with the fire type, and I think a fire ox would be a nice fit. Truthfully, as oxen are domesticated animals, this could work in a number of different places, but I tried to distribute all the remaining members of the Chinese zodiac to the region I feel they fit the absolute best in, and some of the other regions I will be talking about simply fit better with those other Pokemon ideas. Even still though, a fire ox could be great for a Japanese region. My choice for a grass starter is an exciting pick in my opinion, as well as I think a grass type frog based on the Japanese tree frog would be really cool. I do know that Froakie exists, but it is a water type, and if Grookey can be a thing after Chimchar already existed, then this could happen too. I also think a play on the tree frog to make it a grass type would be really creative for an animal that would typically be associated with the water type. Speaking of water, we're getting really creative with my water starter choice, as if I was in charge, I would introduce a water lion. I know the water type on a lion of all things might seem weird, but trust me, I have a reason. It's actually based on the Japanese sea lion, just in a more literal sense as opposed to the actual sea lion itself. Furthermore, the Japanese sea lion is unfortunately extinct, and I think this would also be grounds to make this starter's final evolution part ghost type. I hate to toot my own horn, but I think this is a pretty creative play on words and a nice way to make a really creative and cool Pokemon that also has some legitimate inspirations. Of all of the choices on this list, this is probably the one I want to happen the most personally, and that would be a region based on the western portion of the United States. We currently have two US-based regions, and since one of them surrounds the East Coast, I think it only makes sense to do one on the West Coast. Plus, if Japan can have 4 regions, then the US could definitely have 3. It's certainly big enough and has a ton of different environments to support it. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure what states I would include in this region, because while you could easily include the coastal states California, Washington, and Oregon, I would really want to see some of the Rocky Mountain states like Idaho, Montana, Utah, Colorado, and even Wyoming included as well, because I think if you're going to do a region based on this area, it has to have a Wild West flair to it somewhere. Whatever you ended up using though, I think this would make for a phenomenal region regardless, and part of that would have to do with the starter Pokemon we could see in a region like this. The fire starter is a no-brainer because it's a perfect fit, and that would be a horse. Horses and the Wild West are synonymous with one another, and they're obviously a member of the Chinese zodiac, and frankly the fire type could even be reflective of the hot deserts within this area where a lot of the Wild West showdowns that featured horses took place. It's perfect. In fact, it's too perfect, and it needs to happen right now. The grass type, meanwhile, was also an easy choice because if you've been watching other Pokemon videos on YouTube, you might have seen Mr. Buddy's videos on what if the west coast of the US was a Pokemon region. It's a big video he's still working on, but he's shown off his starters for the region, and the grass type is a raccoon. And, well, I think this Pokemon is perfect, and perfect for a western US region. So shout out to Buddy for that, and make sure you check out the videos he has up so far for his West Coast US region. Anyway, thanks to the water starter needing to once again be habitable on land and water, it made things tricky, so much so that I didn't exactly nail down one specific thing. But I did decide on some type of lizard, reptile, crocodile situation. I loved the idea of a crocodile or alligator, but Totodile is a thing already, so that's out the window. However, I still feel like a reptile of some kind fits this region the best, the requirements of a water starter the best, and complements the other 2 starters the best. So pending some further research, that's what I would go with. This next one is actually a tie for 2 regions, and it's more or less my wildcard pick. 2 of the most fascinating areas of the world that haven't been featured at all in Pokemon are South America and Africa, and I could see a country in either of these places getting a region simply because they have a lot to offer and a ton of potential. For South America, I would go with a Brazil region, since Brazil is probably the most well-known country in South America, and for Africa, I would go with Egypt for basically the same reason. Both of these places have plenty of culture, geography, wildlife, etc. that could definitely support a Pokemon region and could be some of the most interesting ones we've ever had too. Starter-wise, I think both places could also feature a fire snake just like Australia. I didn't want to have any repeat picks here, but since we pretty much have to follow the Zodiac, I didn't really have a choice. So if any of these regions end up happening someday, I think a fire snake is a prime candidate for all of them. For grass starters, I've decided on a Jaguar for Brazil and a Shrew for Egypt. Jaguars are notable in Brazil, and it would complement the other Brazil starters I've picked well, in addition to just being really cool. The Shrew for Egypt is based on the Flowers shrew that's native to the area, hence the type, and would complement the other Egyptian starters I've picked as well. Finally, for the water starters, I picked a Flamingo for Brazil and a Hippo for Egypt. Many have wanted a Flamingo Pokemon for a while, and not only would it work in a Brazilian region, but I think it could have a lot of potential too. The Hippo, meanwhile, you might be scratching your head at for an Egyptian region, but considering that Egypt is still part of Africa where hippos live, and they actually did live in Egypt at one point when the area wasn't as dry, I think it would work. Both water and grass types are naturally a little bit harder to nail down in a place as dry as Egypt, but I think both of the ones I picked could pull it off nicely, while also reflecting the overall look and feel of the region itself. And even though these 2 regions are a tie, if I had to pick one that I'd prefer, I would definitely have to go with an Egypt region. That would be incredible. And finally, my last selection that I believe is amongst the most likely places to become a Pokemon region is Italy. With the Galar region debuting in Sword and Shield, we now have 2 European regions, and I don't think we're done here either when it comes to new Pokemon regions in the future. The reason I believe Italy is the most likely candidate here is because amongst all the other available European countries, Italy is one of the most well-known, most historical, most cultural, and overall most mainstream, if you will, to where it could have some serious appeal as a Pokemon region. Much like the Japanese region I discussed earlier, it would also sit right next to Kalos and Galar as well, and maybe could help bridge the gap between those regions since we did not get to see any kind of connection between them in Sword and Shield. Starter-wise, this is what I've got. For the fire starter, I would do a sheep, because if Wooloo taught us anything, it's that sheep Pokemon do really well in European regions. And even though Italy is a different case to the UK, it could still work really well, especially because you have options in terms of what kind of sheep you'd like to do. Would you do a traditional domestic sheep like Wooloo, or maybe a big horned sheep? There's a ton of potential here, and this is one I really hope we see soon. For the grass starter, I'd want to see a porcupine, specifically based on the crested porcupine, as Italy is one of the only places that it lives. Design-wise, there are also a lot of possibilities, since you could make the quills into a big bush, for instance, for the grass type, so overall I think that could translate really well. Last but not least, for the water type, I would personally like to see a crab of some kind. This fits the land-water dynamic that water starters require really well, but it's not your typical amphibian or reptile, so I think it could be really cool and different that also fits the region really well at the same time. And there we have it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching my video. I want to mention that since there was a lot to cover here, I only really did a preliminary amount of research, so by no means are the starters I chose the absolute best picks in every situation, just something that I think could work. Also, once again, make sure you check out the description to check out all of the wonderful artists of the fan art I used, because they really do deserve the support. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and all of that good stuff as well if you enjoyed the video, and if you like the idea of new Pokemon regions and starters, then I highly recommend checking out my Pokemon Cardinal project, as I am creating just that myself. My remixes are also available on Spotify if you want to support the channel further, and with all of that said, I will see you guys on Tuesday with another video. I love you all very much, and until then, as always, I will smell you guys later.